Welcome to a place where love is not just spoken of, but felt in every breath, every silence, every unspoken ache. Here, stories are not about fairy tales, but about the raw truths that live inside hearts, the longing that lingers through years of emptiness, the unexpected touch that can shatter walls in a single night, the forbidden connection that burns deeper than time itself, and the awakening of soul and flesh that proves passion can rise again even after decades of silence. These are not just stories, they are confessions, lived moments, and the proof that love never truly dies. It only waits for the right spark to return. If you've ever wondered what it means to feel alive again, you'll find it here. Stay, listen, and let each word remind you of the fire that still lives within. The years had a way of slipping quietly into one another, like pages in a book where nothing new was written. Days filled with duties, routines, and silent agreements that had become the rhythm of life. The home was steady, meals were shared, words exchanged, but beneath it all lived a quiet emptiness that grew heavier with time. What was once fire had slowly cooled into a polite companionship, a coexistence that kept life moving, but left the heart untouched. There was no absence of care. The bond had been built on loyalty, years of sacrifices, raising children, paying bills, holding everything together through storms and celebrations. Yet within that bond, a piece of the soul sat untouched, a hunger that could not be quieted by responsibility alone. The body breathed, it moved through each day, but it starved for something deeper, something tender, the kind of touch that doesn't just rest on skin, but speaks directly to the heart, reminding it that it is still alive. It began quietly. The longing wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. It was in the way nights stretched on in silence, two bodies lying side by side, yet oceans apart. It was in the way hands brushed past each other without stopping, in the way eyes avoided holding on too long, as if afraid of remembering the spark that once burned between them, that silence grew into an ache, one that words could never quite capture. It wasn't anger, it wasn't disappointment. It was a deep, aching emptiness, the kind that eats away slowly until the soul itself feels forgotten. In the beginning, there had been passion. There had been fire so fierce it felt uncontainable, the kind of love that could set entire nights on fire and still leave a hunger for more. But years have a way of softening passion into predictability. What once felt urgent became routine. What once was mystery became habit. Love shifted from hunger to duty, and in that shift, the body became a stranger to the tenderness it once knew so well. The longing would rise at unexpected moments, watching a couple laughing together in the park, hearing a song that once belonged to another time, or feeling the brush of a stranger's hand in passing that lingered longer in memory than it should have. It was a reminder of what had been lost, of what still burned quietly beneath the surface, waiting for a reason to be set free again. Loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes it lives in the middle of togetherness, in the silence between words, in the absence of touch. It is the kind of loneliness that cannot be explained to anyone, because on the outside everything looks fine. The home is intact, the bond is still there, but inside, the heart whispers questions in the dark. Is this all that love becomes? Is this the end of passion? Is there nothing left but routine? Every glance in the mirror became a reminder of time passing, of years invested, of youth given away. The reflection showed lines of laughter, lines of worry, the story of years written into the skin. But beneath it all, there was still a woman, still a body aching to be seen, still a heart that wanted to beat faster. And yet that part remained hidden, locked away, because admitting it felt like betrayal, not to another, but to the vows, to the image of what marriage should be. The silence grew heavier in the nights, when the world was still, and thoughts had nowhere to hide. In those moments, the ache became unbearable. The body remembered what it felt like to be touched with hunger, to be kissed until breath was lost, to be held as if nothing else mattered in the world. The memory itself was cruel because it reminded of something that no longer lived in the present, and yet the hunger never died. It lived quietly beneath the surface, waiting for something, anything, to awaken it again. It wasn't simply about desire. It was about feeling alive, about being reminded that love could still burn, that intimacy could still be more than routine. It was about being seen, truly seen, beyond the years, beyond the responsibilities, beyond the silent distance that had become normal. The emptiness was not about lack of love. Love was still there, steady and unshakable, but it had become a love of duty, of respect, of companionship. The heart longed for the love that leaves you trembling, the love that takes over your body until nothing else exists. That kind of love seemed like a memory from another lifetime, and yet the body still yearned for it with every beat. It is a strange thing to feel both grateful and starved at the same time, to have a life built on loyalty and years, and yet to feel a hollow ache within that life. The silence between bodies became heavier than words could ever explain, and in that silence lived the truth, an emptiness no one could see, but one that was impossible to escape. It was that emptiness that made one night enough to change everything forever. It happened quietly, in a way that could almost be missed, if not for the way the heart suddenly remembered what it meant to beat faster. A glance, no different than the thousands exchanged over the years, carried something unfamiliar that night. It lingered, it reached past the surface, deep into a place long untouched, and for the first time in decades, the silence between two souls broke without a single word. There was no warning, no plan, no thought to it. Just the meeting of eyes that seemed to strip away every layer of routine, every shield built by years of distance. That look carried a question, an invitation, and before the mind could resist, the body responded. The hand reached almost hesitantly at first, as if unsure it was allowed, but when skin finally brushed against skin, something inside shattered. The touch was simple, nothing dramatic, nothing bold. Just fingers resting against fingers, a hand resting against a hand, and yet it carried the weight of every unspoken word, every buried desire, every forgotten flame that had once defined love. That single touch felt like fire, spreading warmth through the body, awakening a pulse that had been silent for too long. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to pull away. Breath quickened, not because of fear, but because of recognition. The body remembered. It remembered what it felt like to be wanted, to be touched as if every curve, every line mattered. That single moment, that single brush of skin, was enough to tear down walls built over years of silence. It was as if the soul itself had been waiting for this exact moment to breathe again. What began as a glance became a pull. What began as a touch became a hunger. The space between closed quickly, almost recklessly, as if time itself demanded it. Lips found lips, trembling at first, then deepening with a need that could no longer be denied. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, raw, filled with all the years of longing that had never found release. Every movement carried urgency, as if making up for lost decades in one stolen night. Hands that had grown accustomed to stillness came alive, exploring, holding, grasping with a need that felt unstoppable. The body responded in ways it had almost forgotten it could, every nerve lit like fire, every breath heavy with desire. The hunger that had been buried beneath years of duty rose with a force that could not be contained. It was not just passion, it was recognition, the recognition of being alive again, of being seen, of being desired not out of habit, but out of raw, undeniable want. The body leaned into it, surrendered to it, as if afraid that pulling away would mean losing the moment forever. The kiss deepened, the hands grew bolder, the closeness unbearable to resist. The room around disappeared, the years disappeared, the world itself disappeared. All that remained was heat, pulse, hunger. For the first time in decades, desire felt real. It wasn't duty, it wasn't routine. It was need, it was fire. The night stretched on, every second carrying the intensity of rediscovery. The way skin responded to touch, the way hearts raced in sync, the way breathless whispers replaced silence. It was as if a dam had broken, flooding everything with emotions and sensations that had been locked away for too long. What made it powerful was not just the physical closeness, but the way the soul responded. The touch was more than flesh against flesh. It was soul against soul, breaking barriers, reminding both that love could still burn, that intimacy could still exist, that nothing was truly lost. Each kiss tasted of years gone by. Each embrace carried the weight of everything unsaid, and each movement felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen by time. The intensity of that night could never be measured, because it wasn't about the body alone. It was about the awakening of something far deeper. When it finally slowed, when bodies finally rested against each other, there was no need for words. The silence no longer carried emptiness. It carried meaning. It carried truth. The glance that began it all had rewritten everything. That night, one simple touch was enough to change the course of everything forever. The moment closeness became undeniable. It wasn't about the hunger of bodies colliding out of need, but something far deeper, something that felt almost forbidden because of the truth it carried. Pressed together, the world seemed to vanish, and what remained was an intimacy that went beyond flesh. It was a rediscovery, a sacred fire that had once burned brightly, but had been left in ashes for years. Every kiss, every movement, every trembling breath carried not only the urgency of desire, but the weight of time, years that had passed without passion, years that had dulled the flame. That night, those years collapsed into nothing, consumed by the intensity of connection that felt both overwhelming and inevitable. The touch was not rushed. It was desperate, yes, but it also lingered, as if both wanted to memorize the shape of what had been missing. Fingers traced lines as though learning them for the first time, though they were already familiar. Each touch asked a question, and each answer came in the form of surrender. It wasn't about possession. It was about finding again, after so long, the kind of closeness that makes every breath sacred. The kisses carried a truth that words never could. They weren't sweet or playful. They were filled with years of silence, years of unspoken ache. Each kiss was heavy, almost aching, as if both understood that they had been starving without even realizing how deep the hunger had grown. Lips pressed harder, lingered longer, as if afraid that letting go would mean returning to that silence forever. The heat between bodies was undeniable, but what made it powerful was not just desire. It was the recognition of being seen again, of being wanted, of being touched in a way that said, "You matter, you are alive, you are still fire." That recognition was more intoxicating than any embrace, more powerful than any breathless gasp. It reached deep into the soul and pulled something out that had been buried for too long. When arms wrapped tighter, when bodies pressed closer, it wasn't simply about closeness. It was about filling the void left by all the years of distance. The skin remembered, the heart remembered, and suddenly the body was no longer a stranger to itself. Every movement was a return to passion, to tenderness, to being consumed not out of obligation, but out of sheer, undeniable want. There was no hesitation in the surrender. The walls built by duty, time, and routine collapsed under the weight of that passion. Breaths came faster, hearts raced, and with every second the fire grew until it felt unstoppable. The body no longer held back. It opened, it yielded, it embraced what it had been craving without even admitting it. The sacred fire of passion that had once seemed long dead returned with a force so strong it was almost frightening, yet impossible to resist. The whispers between gasps were not about promises or explanations. They were fragments of truth, raw and unpolished, words that meant nothing to anyone else but carried everything in that moment. Words like need, like want, like finally. Each sound was a confession, each touch a declaration that went deeper than any vow could ever reach. Time dissolved into sensation. There was no past, no future, only the present moment where bodies moved together, not in search of release but in search of meaning. It wasn't about the act, it was about the connection, the way two souls recognized one another after years of silence. It was about rediscovering what had always been buried underneath, waiting for the courage to rise again. The depth of it was almost unbearable. The way hands clutched, the way mouths met again and again, the way the fire refused to dim, it all carried the truth that love had not died. It had only been waiting, and in that waiting, it had grown deeper, heavier, more consuming than ever before. When at last the intensity slowed, when the urgency gave way to quiet closeness, the silence that returned was not empty. It was full of meaning, of recognition, of the undeniable truth that everything had changed. Resting in that closeness, breathing the same air, hearts still racing but steadying in unison, there was no need for words. The connection spoke louder than anything that could ever be said. That night, passion was no longer forbidden. It was the truest form of love rediscovered, the kind that leaves no part of the soul untouched. That night will always remain etched into memory, not because of the heat of bodies or the intensity of touch alone, but because of the way the heart itself came alive again. For years, the heart had beaten out of duty, carrying life forward in silence, steady but subdued, almost mechanical in rhythm. But in the space of those hours, it felt reborn, pounding not out of necessity, but out of joy, out of hunger, out of something that had been missing for so long. It was as though the soul itself had been asleep and suddenly jolted awake, trembling under the weight of what it remembered it could feel. The closeness was undeniable, the intimacy overwhelming, but it wasn't just about desire. It went deeper, far beyond the surface, into the very core of existence. With every kiss, with every embrace, a truth became clearer, the truth that life was not over, that passion was not gone, that love could still sweep in like a storm and change everything, even after decades of silence. It wasn't just flesh meeting flesh, it was soul touching soul, and in that collision, something eternal was awakened. The heart had long carried emptiness, the kind that comes when days blur into years and years blur into decades. That emptiness had been accepted, almost like a fate that could not be changed. But when arms wrapped tightly, when warmth pressed so close it felt like there was no longer any space to breathe, that emptiness shattered. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the body didn't just exist. It pulsed, it burned, it lived. The way lips met, the way breath caught, the way the body trembled with every touch. It was not a rediscovery of desire alone, but of self. It was proof that beneath the layers of years, beneath the weight of duty and time, there still lived a woman with fire inside her, a heart capable of racing, a body capable of quivering under the intensity of love. That realization was more powerful than anything else, that nothing had been lost, only buried, waiting for the right moment to awaken. There was something sacred in the way time seemed to dissolve. Age, years, obligations, fears, all of it disappeared. What remained was raw, unfiltered closeness, the kind that made every second feel infinite. Eyes met, lips parted, and the silence that once haunted nights was replaced by the rhythm of shared breath and beating hearts. Each kiss was not simply desire but declaration, that love was still possible, that intimacy was still alive, that passion could bloom even in the most unexpected seasons of life. The trembling that came with each touch wasn't just physical. It was the trembling of the soul, of a heart rediscovering what it meant to be fully alive. Tears almost rose, not out of sadness, but out of the overwhelming depth of feeling. It was impossible to separate the body from the soul in that moment. They moved together, both hungry, both desperate, both clinging to what felt like a resurrection. The heat grew, the closeness deepened, and the body surrendered, not with hesitation, but with gratitude. Gratitude that love could still feel this way. Gratitude that passion could still ignite. Gratitude that after decades of emptiness, something so beautiful could return with such force. Every kiss felt like forgiveness for the years lost. Every embrace like a promise that it wasn't too late. When exhaustion finally softened the urgency, when bodies finally rested in stillness against each other, the silence that followed was unlike any silence before. It wasn't hollow, it wasn't lonely. It was full, overflowing with meaning, with truth, with an intimacy that went beyond flesh. The stillness carried peace, but also a quiet fire that promised it would not fade. That night was not just about desire. It was the resurrection of the heart, the awakening of both soul and flesh, the undeniable proof that even after decades, love can return with a force so powerful it changes the meaning of life forever. And so, love reminds us once again, it can be silent for years, but it never disappears. It waits, it lingers, and when it finally awakens, it rewrites everything. If this story touched your heart, if you felt even a spark of recognition in its words, then don't let it end here. Like this video, share it with someone who still believes in the fire of true love, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another moment where passion, soul, and tenderness come alive again. Love is still here, and it's waiting for you.